Welcome back to Revenge Storm, where justice always finds its way. Today's story will shake you to your core. A young woman declared dead by her own stepmother, 7 years erased from existence. A grandmother who built a trap from beyond the grave. And a will reading that ended with police walking through the door. What would you do if your family tried to bury you alive? Stay with me until the end, because the moment Kristen Bowman walked into that room will give you chills. Let's begin. Before I tell you what happens next, please let me know where you're watching from, and remember to subscribe to the channel so this story can reach more people. My name is Kristen Bowman. I'm 34 years old, and for the past 7 years I've been legally dead. Before my life was stolen, I worked as an accountant at a mid-sized firm in Portland, the only daughter of Thomas Bowman and the late Margaret Hartwell, living a quiet life that I never appreciated until it was ripped away from me. I sat in my parked car outside Victor Haynes' law office, watching ordinary people walk through the front door. A woman in a business suit checked her phone. A young man carried a folder of documents. They moved through the world so easily, so carelessly, with driver's licenses in their wallets and names on their credit cards. For 7 years, I'd had neither. For 7 years, I'd been nobody. The last time I entered that building, I signed paperwork as Thomas Bowman's daughter, his heir, his surviving child. I left as a ghost. Today, 30 minutes from now, I would walk back through those doors. Not for money, not for revenge, for something far more precious. My name. My mind drifted back to the night. Everything changed. I still remember the mountain road, the darkness pressing against my windshield, the way my headlights carved through fog. I was driving home from a work conference, tired but alert, when my steering wheel jerked in my hands. I pulled right, the car pulled left. For one terrible moment, I understood that the machine no longer obeyed me, that 2 tons of metal and glass had become my coffin. The guardrail came fast, then the ravine. Then nothing. I woke in a stranger's cabin, wrapped in bandages that smelled of antiseptic and wood smoke. A woman's face swam into focus. Margaret Torres, 68 years old, retired emergency room nurse, living alone in the mountains. She saved my life with supplies meant for her own medical needs and skills, honed over 40 years of trauma care. You've been unconscious for 5 days, she told me. Your car burned. I couldn't get you to a hospital. Roads were washed out from the storms. I did what I could. My memories returned in fragments, the swerving car, the impact, crawling through a shattered window before flames erupted behind me, then stumbling through darkness until my legs gave out. As soon as I could sit up, I borrowed Margaret's phone and called home with shaking hands. Diane answered on the 3rd ring. My stepmother. The woman who'd shared my father's bed for 14 years. I said, "Diane, it's me. I'm alive. There was an accident." Her response wasn't shock. It wasn't relief. It wasn't even confusion. It was ice. Kristen Bowman died 2 weeks ago. We held a memorial service. Whoever you are, this is a cruel and pathetic scam. Don't call this number again. The line went dead. In that moment, sitting in Margaret's cabin with the phone still pressed to my ear, I understood something that would take months to fully accept. Diane hadn't been fooled into thinking I was dead. Diane had made it happen. Every door I tried after that was locked. Local police dismissed me as mentally disturbed. Government offices showed my social security number flagged as deceased. My bank accounts had been closed. My apartment had been leased to a new tenant. Even my best friend Amy, when I finally reached her, gasped and said, "Oh my God, they told us you died. There was a service. Your stepmother was devastated." The story had been sold perfectly. A tragic accident. A grieving family. A closed casket because there was nothing left to bury. I wasn't fighting a mistake. I was fighting a machine that had erased me from existence. And that machine had protectors inside the system, people who made sure the questions stopped before they started. They wanted me to disappear. So I did, but not the way they planned. I became a ghost who watched everything. And I had been watching them for 7 years, waiting for the moment when the living would have to answer to the dead. The first year was about survival, nothing more. After Margaret Torres drove me to a bus station with $200 and a promise to pray for me, I found myself in a city where nobody knew my face, sleeping in shelters and eating at soup kitchens. I was 27 years old, had a degree in accounting, and couldn't prove I existed. That was when I found Martha Sullivan, or rather, when she found me. Martha ran a non-profit called the New Identity Project, helping victims of identity fraud and domestic violence rebuild their lives. She was a former prosecutor who had left the courtroom to do work that actually changed things. When I told her my story, she didn't look at me like I was crazy. She looked at me like she was solving a puzzle. "This isn't random," she said. "Someone with connections did this to you. Someone who knew exactly which strings to pull." Martha gave me shelter in the organization's group home. She gave me cash work doing bookkeeping for the nonprofit, work that wouldn't require a social security number. But most importantly, she gave me a strategy. "You can't fight a system that's been turned against you by screaming louder," she told me one night over coffee. "You fight it by building an unassailable case. That takes time. That takes patience. That takes evidence. Right now, you're a crazy woman claiming to be someone who died. In 5 years, you need to be a victim with a folder full of proof. There's a difference." I didn't listen at first. The second year, I fought back the only way I knew how, and I lost every single time. My first attempt was local police. I walked into a station in a different county, far from where Gerald Patterson had influence, and I told them everything. They took notes. They made calls. 2 days later, they told me the case was closed because their inquiries confirmed Kristen Bowman had died in a car accident, and the woman in front of them was either confused or running a scam. My second attempt was state police. They were more polite, took a longer report, and assigned a detective who seemed genuinely interested. Then the detective stopped returning my calls. When I finally reached him, he said the case had been transferred and he couldn't discuss it further. My third attempt was the FBI tip line for identity fraud. I spent 3 hours writing a detailed report. I never received a response. My fourth attempt was the stupidest and most desperate. I showed up at Diane's door. I don't know what I expected. Confrontation, maybe. A confession. What I got was Diane's calm face as she said, "I'm calling 911. There's a dangerous woman at my door claiming to be my dead stepdaughter. She's been stalking our family for months. I ran before the police arrived." Martha's warning echoed in my ears for months afterward. "They're not just ignoring you, Kristen. They're actively blocking you. Someone has influence. Someone is making sure every door you knock on stays closed." The third year changed everything. Eleanor's private investigator found me through Martha's network. My grandmother had been searching since the day of the memorial service, refusing to believe the official story, hiring investigators with her own money, following leads that went nowhere until one finally led somewhere. Our reunion happened in a park on a rainy Tuesday. I saw her walking toward me, smaller than I remembered, older, but with the same fierce eyes my mother had. We held each other and cried until neither of us could breathe. Then we sat on a bench and she told me what she had found. "No body," Eleanor said. "No real investigation. Your stepmother crying on cue at a service with a closed casket." I knew from the first moment something was wrong. Her private investigator had dug deep, and he had found things that made my blood turn cold. First, there was the life insurance policy. My father had purchased it years ago, standard financial planning, with Diane listed as beneficiary. $200,000 paid out within 4 months of my supposed death. That money had come fast, faster than it should have if there had been any real questions about what happened. But that wasn't all. The investigator had found something else, something that went back years before my accident. Shell company payments from my father's accounts, fake invoices for services never rendered. Money flowing out in small amounts that added up to something massive. "Your father was being robbed, Kristen," Eleanor said, her voice shaking with rage, "and I think he knew it before he died." The 4th and 5th years, I became the accountant I had been trained to be. I reached out to a former colleague, someone who owed me a favour from before my death, and I obtained copies of my father's financial records. The numbers told a story that made me sick. $800,000 missing over 12 years. Payments to Premier Home Services, a company that existed only on paper. Consulting fees to people who had never done any consulting. Household expense reports that were inflated by thousands every month. All of it traced back to accounts Diane controlled, accounts my father had trusted her to manage while he focused on his business. I finally understood the full picture. The insurance money was pocket change to Diane. The trust fund was the real prize, nearly $3 million that would come to me when I turned 30, along with full audit rights over every financial record in the family. If I conducted that audit, I would find everything. The embezzlement, the theft, the 12 years of lies. Diane hadn't tried to kill me for what I had. She had tried to kill me for what I would have discovered. The 6th year brought Eleanor's cancer diagnosis, and the 7th year became a race against time. "I won't live to see you vindicated," my grandmother told me in her hospital room, holding my hand with fingers that had grown thin and fragile. "But I will make sure it happens." Eleanor worked with Victor Haynes, her attorney of 30 years, to design a will that was more than a distribution of assets. It was a legal trap, every clause written to corner Diane, to force her into impossible choices, to make the truth unavoidable. Victor coordinated with a sympathetic district attorney through connections he had built over decades, laying the groundwork for an investigation that would spring to life the moment Eleanor's will was read. 3 months before the 7-year anniversary of my death, the date when Diane would petition the court to have me declared legally dead and claim everything, my grandmother passed away. I was holding her hand when she took her last breath. Her final words to me were a command. "Make them say your name in that courtroom. Make them admit you exist." I sat in my car outside Victor's office, watching the clock tick toward the moment I had waited 7 years to reach. Grandmother didn't just leave me an inheritance. She left me a weapon, loaded, aimed, and ready. All I had to do was let Diane pull the trigger on herself. I stepped out of my car and walked toward the building, but I didn't go through the front door. Victor had arranged for me to wait in a small office down the hall from the main conference room, close enough to hear when the moment was right, far enough to remain invisible until the trap was fully sprung. I sat in that office with 2 detectives from the district attorney's task force, watching the clock on the wall, listening to my own heartbeat, and waiting for the woman who had stolen my life to walk into the room where she would lose everything. Diane arrived exactly on time, because Diane was always precise about things that involved money. I couldn't see her from where I sat, but I heard her voice in the hallway, that smooth, confident tone I remembered from years of family dinners and holiday gatherings. She was performing the role of grieving family matriarch, dressed in elegant black, as if Eleanor's death had wounded her deeply, as if she hadn't spent years lying to my grandmother's face. Rachel followed behind her, and even from a distance, I could sense my stepsister's nervousness in the hesitant rhythm of her footsteps. Rachel had always been the weaker one, pale and fidgeting whenever anything made her uncomfortable, unable to meet anyone's eyes when guilt was eating at her conscience. They expected to divide Eleanor's $4.5 million estate today. They expected this to be the final payoff after years of patience, the reward for keeping secrets and maintaining lies. Victor Haynes greeted them with professional courtesy, his voice warm but neutral, his expression revealing nothing of what was coming. He had been my grandmother's attorney for 30 years, and he had been waiting for this moment almost as long as I had. The reading began with standard bequests. I listened through the thin wall as Victor's voice carried through the conference room, methodical and precise. Charitable donations to organizations Eleanor had supported for decades. Small inheritances to long-time household staff who had served her faithfully. Sentimental items distributed to distant relatives and old friends. I could almost feel Diane's impatience growing with each minor bequest, her foot probably tapping beneath the table, her fingers probably drumming against her designer handbag. She hadn't come here for sentiment. She had come here for the real estate and the investment accounts, the millions that would complete the fortune she had been building through theft and murder. Finally, Victor reached Section 4. I heard the rustle of papers, the shift in his tone as he approached the heart of the document. The property at 247 Maple Street and associated accounts totaling $1.2 million. Victor read, "Are bequeathed to my granddaughter, Kristen Bowman, contingent upon direct identity verification within 60 days of this reading." There was a moment of silence. Then Diane's voice, smooth as silk, interrupting with practiced confidence. "My stepdaughter passed away 7 years ago, Mr. Haynes. Surely you're aware of this. The court issued an official declaration of death just last month. I have the documentation right here." I heard the soft thud of a folder being placed on the table, could picture Diane sliding it across to Victor with the self-assured smile of a woman who believed she had already won. Victor took his time examining the folder. I counted the seconds in my head, imagining Diane's satisfaction, Rachel's nervous relief, the two of them mentally spending money that would never be theirs. "I see," Victor said finally. "The declaration of death in absentia, based on the original accident investigation 7 years ago, standard legal procedure for cases where no remains were recovered." He paused, and when he spoke again, his voice had changed, becoming something harder and more deliberate. "However, Mrs. Bowman, I must draw your attention to Section 5 of Mrs. Hartwell's will. It specifies that anyone claiming the share of a deceased beneficiary must provide complete documentation." He began reading aloud. "A court-certified declaration of death. A complete forensic report from the original incident. DNA analysis confirming identity of remains. Independent verification from a medical examiner not involved in the original case. Another pause. Do you have these documents, Mrs. Bowman? Diane's voice lost some of its smoothness. The original investigation was. The circumstances were difficult. The remains were too damaged for comprehensive analysis. Surely you understand that Victor interrupted her, something he had probably been waiting years to do. Section 6 states clearly that incomplete documentation triggers an automatic review of all death-related claims by the District Attorney's Office. The silence that followed was heavy enough to feel through the wall. That review began 3 weeks ago, Mrs. Bowman. The District Attorney's Office has been examining every document related to Kristen Bowman's death, the original accident report, the coroner's statements, the insurance claims, the petition for death declaration, all of it. I heard Diane's chair scrape against the floor as she stood up, her composure finally cracking. This is harassment. This is some kind of vendetta because Eleanor never liked me. My lawyer will have something to say about Victor, raised his hand, and somehow the gesture was enough to stop her. There's one more matter, Mrs. Bowman. Please sit down. The authority in his voice surprised even me. Diane must have sat, because the room went quiet again. During the DA's review, Victor continued. An interesting discrepancy emerged. Several discrepancies, actually, but one in particular that I think you'll find relevant to today's proceedings. I heard him remove his glasses, could picture him looking directly at Diane with the steady gaze of a man about to deliver a killing blow. If Kristen Bowman died 7 years ago in that accident on Mountain Ridge Road, why did someone matching her fingerprints, her dental records, and her DNA sign an identity verification affidavit at the District Attorney's Office yesterday morning? That was my cue. I stood up from my chair in the small office, straightened my jacket, and nodded to the 2 detectives who had been waiting with me. One of them opened the door to the conference room. I walked through it with my head held high, composed, dignified, and very much alive. Diane's face went through a transformation I will remember for the rest of my life. First confusion, as if she didn't recognize me. Then recognition, followed instantly by denial. Her mind refusing to accept what her eyes were seeing. Then the colour drained from her face completely, leaving her pale as a corpse, which seemed fitting given the circumstances. Rachel burst into tears immediately, loud, ugly sobs that she tried to muffle with her hands, her whole body shaking with the release of guilt she had carried for 7 years. I looked at my stepmother, this woman who had stolen my father's money, collected insurance on my death, and slept peacefully for 7 years, believing she had gotten away with murder. "Hello, Diane," I said. My voice was steady. I had practiced this moment 1,000 times in my head. I believe you have something that belongs to me. One of the detectives stepped forward before Diane could respond. Diane Bowman, you're under arrest for fraud, conspiracy, and attempted murder. You have the right to remain silent. Anything you say can and will be used against you in a court of law. Diane didn't scream. She didn't fight or protest or try to run. She went completely still, the stillness of a predator who realizes in one terrible moment that she has become prey. Her eyes stayed locked on mine, and I saw something in them I had never seen before. Fear, real fear. When she finally spoke, her voice was barely a whisper. I want my lawyer. For 7 years, she told everyone I was dead. She looked into my grandmother's eyes and lied. She collected money with my name on the check. Now she stood in handcuffs and I was the one still breathing. Some ghosts don't haunt. They testify. The dominoes began falling within hours of Diane's arrest. Gerald Patterson, the deputy coroner who had helped erase my existence, was taken into custody the same afternoon. Federal agents arrived at his home with warrants for falsifying official documents and obstruction of justice. Gerald was 62 years old, facing the end of his career, the loss of his pension, and the possibility of dying in prison. He chose survival over loyalty. His testimony was comprehensive and devastating. Diane had approached him 2 weeks after my accident, he said. She knew the car had burned and that no body had been recovered. She paid him $25,000 for his cooperation. His job was simple. Delay any DNA testing indefinitely, lose paperwork that might raise questions, and provide official statements supporting the presumed death narrative. Gerald did everything she asked. He buried reports, redirected inquiries, and used his position to ensure that no one looked too closely at what had really happened on that mountain road. But Gerald gave investigators something even more valuable than his own confession. He gave them Eddie Garza. Eddie was the mechanic who had actually sabotaged my car, Gerald's brother-in-law, who owned a small auto repair shop on the outskirts of town. When detectives arrived at Eddie's garage with a warrant, he tried to run. He didn't get far. Facing attempted murder charges, Eddie confirmed everything. Diane had paid him $8,000 to loosen critical steering components in my car, making sure they would fail under stress. She said it just needed to look like an accident, Eddie told investigators. Said the girl was reckless anyway, always driving too fast on those mountain roads. Nobody would question it. $8,000. That was the price Diane had put on my life. Less than she spent on handbags. The trial preparation took months, but the most important moment came before any jury was seated. With fraud officially confirmed by multiple confessions, Victor Haynes was authorized to open my father's sealed documents. I sat in the gallery of the courtroom on the day Victor presented them, not knowing what to expect, not knowing that my father had left me one final gift. The judge ordered the letter, read aloud for the record. The courtroom fell silent as the clerk began speaking in my father's words, written 3 months before his death while he was fighting the pancreatic cancer that would eventually take him. To whoever reads this, the letter began, I pray it's my daughter Kristen, and I pray she's safe. I discovered 6 months ago that my wife Diane has been stealing from me for over a decade. The total is nearly $800,000. I found the shell companies, the fake invoices, all of it. I'm dying. The doctors give me 3 months, maybe 4. I don't have the strength for lawyers and courtrooms, but I have enough strength to protect my daughter. I've modified my will. If Kristen lives to 30 and conducts the audit, she'll find everything. Diane will face justice. If something happens to Kristen before then, if Diane somehow prevents the audit, this letter exists. Diane doesn't know about the modification or this letter, but I know my wife. If Kristen becomes an obstacle to Diane's secrets, Kristen will be in danger. I should have protected my daughter better. I should have seen what Diane was years ago. I failed as a father. But maybe, even from the grave, I can still keep my promise to Margaret. I will always protect our little girl. I love you, Kristen. Find the truth. Be safe. Live. Your father, Thomas Bowman. I wept in that courtroom without shame. My father had known. He had seen the truth about Diane, had understood the danger I would face, and had done everything his failing body would allow to protect me. He had been right about everything. Even dying, even weak, he had tried to save me. I only wished I could have told him that it worked. Diane's trial lasted 3 weeks. The charges were comprehensive. Attempted murder for the steering sabotage, embezzlement of $800,000, insurance fraud, conspiracy, and filing a false death declaration. Her defense attorneys tried everything. They blamed Gerald, claiming he had acted alone. They suggested mental illness, painting Diane as a woman who had snapped under pressure. They even implied that I had staged my own disappearance, that I was the real criminal in this story. The jury didn't believe any of it. They deliberated for 4 hours and returned with guilty verdicts on every single count. At sentencing, the judge asked Diane if she had anything to say. For a moment, I thought she might apologize, might show some flicker of humanity after everything she had done. Instead, she showed her true self one final time. She looked directly at me, her eyes burning with rage rather than remorse, and said, "She was supposed to die in that car. Why couldn't she just die?" The judge's response was immediate. "That statement alone, Mrs. Bowman, justifies every year of your sentence." Diane received 32 years to life in prison, with no possibility of parole for 20 years. She would be nearly 80 before she could even ask to be released. The predator had finally been caged. Justice came for everyone who had helped her. Gerald Patterson received 10 years in federal prison, his cooperation buying him a reduced sentence but costing him everything else. His pension was revoked. He was permanently barred from public service. His name would be synonymous with corruption for the rest of his life. Eddie Garza received 12 years in state prison for his role as an accessory to attempted murder. His auto shop was seized under asset forfeiture laws. He showed no remorse at his sentencing, only complained that Diane had never paid him the full amount she promised. Rachel's case was more complicated. Her attorneys argued that she had suspected, but never truly known what her mother had done. Prosecutors presented texts and emails showing willful blindness, a deliberate choice not to ask questions whose answers she didn't want to hear. In the end, Rachel testified against Diane in exchange for a reduced charge. She received 18 months in minimum security federal prison plus 3 years of probation. She was required to repay the $400,000 she had received from my father's trust fund over the years. But the legal consequences were almost merciful compared to what happened to the rest of her life. Her husband divorced her when he discovered she had suspected the truth for years and said nothing. She was fired from her job when the story made the news. Former friends refused to speak to her. Rachel had chosen silence, and silence had cost her everything. The legal process to reverse my fraudulent death declaration took 3 months. Every document had to be corrected, every record updated, every trace of my non-existence erased and replaced with proof that I was alive. Social security records, driver's license, bank accounts, credit history, 7 years of being nobody, undone one form at a time. The trust fund my father had left me was restored, nearly $3 million, with 7 years of accumulated interest. The insurance payout Diane had collected was clawed back from her seized assets. On the day I received my new driver's license, I sat in my car in the DMV parking lot and cried for an hour, not from sadness, from the overwhelming relief of existing again. I held that small plastic card with my name on it, my photo, my date of birth, and I felt something I had almost forgotten was possible. I felt real. The courts called it justice. The newspapers called it a miracle. My father's letter called it love that outlasted death. But standing in that parking lot, holding a plastic card with my name printed on it, I called it something simpler. I called it Tuesday, the first ordinary day of my new life. 6 months after the trial ended, I finally moved into the apartment at 247 Maple Street. The building was old, but well maintained, 3 stories of red brick in a quiet neighbourhood where people walked their dogs in the evening and knew their neighbours by name. My grandmother had left me this place, and stepping through the door for the first time felt like stepping into her arms one last time. The apartment was small but warm, filled with afternoon light that poured through windows facing west. Eleanor had maintained it for years, even when I was supposedly dead. Fresh flowers delivered monthly, a cleaning service every week. The refrigerator stocked with basics, as if a guest might arrive at any moment. She had kept this place alive, waiting for me, believing I would come home even when the whole world said I was gone. On the kitchen table, Victor had placed 2 items he said Eleanor had left specifically for me. The first was an envelope with my name written in her handwriting. The second was a shoebox, worn at the corners, held closed with a rubber band. I opened the letter first. Eleanor's handwriting was shaky but clear, written in the final weeks of her life, when her strength was failing but her spirit never did. "My darling girl," it began. "If you're reading this, you survived. I knew you would. You have your mother's spine and your father's stubborn heart. I'm sorry I couldn't fight harder while I was alive. The restraining order, the lawyers, Diane's connections. I tried everything legal and hit walls everywhere I turned. So I built this instead, a trap that would spring whether I was alive or dead. The apartment is yours. I used to visit every month, sit by the window, and talk to you as if you could hear me. Maybe you could. Maybe love travels further than we know. Live loudly now, Kristen. You've been silent long enough. The world needs to hear your voice. All my love, forever. Grandma Ellie." I held that letter against my chest and cried until I couldn't breathe. Then I opened the shoebox. Inside were 7 birthday cards, 1 for each year I had been dead. Eleanor had written them faithfully, every single year, as if I would someday read them. The first card was simple. "Happy 28th birthday, my darling. Wherever you are, I hope you're safe. I will never stop looking." Each year the cards grew longer, filled with updates about her life, memories of my mother and father, fierce declarations that she knew I was alive and that she would find me. The 6th card mentioned her cancer diagnosis, her determination to see justice done before she died. The 7th card, the last one, was dated 2 weeks before her death. "Happy 34th birthday, Kristen. Next year I'll hand this to you myself." I can feel it. We're so close now. She almost made it. 2 weeks. If she had lived just a few months longer, she would have seen me walk into that conference room. She would have seen Diane in handcuffs. She would have known that everything she built had worked. I spread the cards across the kitchen table and read every word, letting my grandmother's voice fill the apartment she had kept waiting for me all those years. Among the documents seized from Diane's home during the investigation, detectives had found something unexpected. A small jewellery box hidden in the back of a closet, containing a simple gold wedding ring. My mother's ring. The ring my father had placed on Margaret's finger 30 years ago. The ring she had worn until the day she died when I was 10 years old. Diane had kept it all these years, maybe as a trophy. Maybe she had simply forgotten it was there. Either way, it belonged to me now. I wear it on a chain around my neck, close to my heart, where I can feel its weight against my skin. Both my parents are gone, but both of them loved me enough to try to protect me beyond their deaths. My father with his letter and his modified will. My mother through the grandmother who raised her and who never stopped fighting for me. That knowledge is worth more than any inheritance. That love is worth more than any amount of money. I kept the apartment and took a modest living allowance from the Restored Trust Fund. The remainder, nearly $3 million, I used to establish the Thomas and Eleanor Foundation. It's a non-profit organisation supporting Martha's group and other organisations that help victims of identity fraud rebuild their lives. At the Foundation's launch event, I spoke publicly for the first time about what had happened to me. The room was full of reporters and donors and survivors who had heard my story and wanted to help. I stood at the podium and said the words I had been holding inside for 7 years. For 7 years, I didn't exist. No name, no rights, no proof I was alive. I learned that identity isn't just paperwork, it's personhood. When someone steals your identity, they steal your humanity. This foundation exists to help people reclaim both. The applause that followed wasn't for me. It was for everyone in that room who understood what it meant to be erased and what it meant to come back. Now, 6 months later, my life looks nothing like it did before, and nothing like it did during those 7 years of hiding. I work 3 days a week at Martha's organisation, counselling survivors who are going through what I went through. I'm enrolled in law school, evening classes, specialising in fraud and identity crimes. On my balcony at 247 Maple Street, I grow tomatoes in containers, the way my mother used to when I was a child. I have dinner with Martha every Thursday. I've started dating someone, a public defender named James, who understands why I sometimes need to sit in silence and who never pushes me to talk before I'm ready. I'm not over what happened. I never will be. But I've built a life on top of it, a life that honours everyone who fought for me. On a quiet evening last week, I sat in Eleanor's favourite chair by the window, watching the sunset paint the sky orange and pink. My phone buzzed with a new email. A woman in Ohio whose sister had been declared dead under suspicious circumstances. The family didn't believe it, the police wouldn't investigate. She had heard about my case and was desperate for help. I read her message twice, then began typing a response. I knew exactly what this woman was feeling. I knew exactly what needed to happen next. People ask if I hate Diane. I did, for years. Hatred was oxygen. It kept me breathing when nothing else could. But hatred is heavy, and I've carried enough weight. Diane took 7 years from me. She took my father's final months I could have spent at his bedside instead of running for my life. She took my grandmother's peace. Ellie died still fighting a battle that should have been won years earlier. Those years are gone. I don't get them back, but Diane doesn't get any more of my time. Not one more hour, not one more thought. I didn't come back for revenge. Revenge is a destination. You arrive and there's nothing left to do. I came back for something with a future. Justice. Justice isn't an ending. It's a foundation you build on. My name is Kristen Bowman. For 7 years, the world declared me dead, but I'm still here, helping others come back from their own graves one case at a time. Some people survive tragedy and spend their lives recovering. Others survive and spend their lives making sure it doesn't happen to someone else. I know which person I choose to be. I know which person my father would be proud of. I know which person my grandmother believed I always was. Kristen's story is over, but the lessons it teaches us will stay long after the last word fades. What happened to her might seem like something out of a movie, too dramatic to be real, but the truth is that identity fraud and family betrayal happen every single day in America. Thousands of people discover each year that someone they trusted has stolen from them, lied to them, or manipulated legal systems against them. The difference between those who survive and those who don't often comes down to a few critical choices that Kristen made, choices that any of us can learn from. First, she refused to give up, even when every door closed in her face. When the police dismissed her, when the government offices showed her as deceased, when her own stepmother threatened to have her arrested, Kristen kept fighting. She didn't let rejection become defeat. She let it become fuel. If you ever find yourself facing a system that seems designed to work against you, remember that persistence is not just a virtue. It is a survival skill. Keep records. Keep copies. Keep pushing until someone listens. Second, she found allies and accepted help. Kristen could not have survived alone. Martha Sullivan gave her shelter and strategy. Eleanor gave her resources and unwavering belief. Victor Haynes gave her legal expertise and patience. None of us are meant to face our darkest moments in isolation. If you are going through something difficult, reach out. Find your Martha. Find your Eleanor. There are people who want to help, but they cannot help if they don't know you need them. Third, she chose justice over revenge. This might be the most important lesson of all. Kristen waited 7 years not because she wanted to hurt Diane, but because she wanted to build a case that would stand up in court. She wanted truth, not just pain. Revenge feels satisfying in the moment, but it leaves you empty. Justice creates something lasting. It protects others. It builds a foundation for a better future. When you have been wronged, ask yourself what outcome will actually heal you, and pursue that instead of just pursuing hurt. Finally, Kristen turned her pain into purpose. She didn't just survive and move on. She created a foundation to help others. She went to law school. She dedicated her life to making sure what happened to her would be harder to do to someone else. That transformation, from victim to advocate, is available to all of us. Our wounds can become our wisdom if we choose to let them. Thank you for listening to Kristen's story today. If it moved you, if it made you think, if it reminded you of someone you know or something you've experienced, I hope you'll take a moment to subscribe to this channel so you never miss another story like this one. We share new videos every week, stories of survival, justice, and the incredible strength of ordinary people facing extraordinary circumstances. Leave a comment below and tell me what you thought. Did Kristen make the right choices? What would you have done differently? Your opinions matter to me, and I read every single comment. Share this video with someone who needs to hear it today. Until next time, stay strong, stay smart, and never let anyone erase who you are.